joining us now from BamaOnline.com, senior analyst, joined by Travis Reier. And we talked a little bit, Travis, about the college football news today regarding Jim Harbaugh, but obviously Alabama has a completely different situation. It's unique. And I was going through the list of quarterback names over the last 5 years or so, starting with Jalen Hurts, then Tua, then Mac Jones, and Bryce Young. I mean, these are all guys playing starting MVP level type quarterbacks, perhaps in the NFL. Now we have a question mark next to the starting quarterback situation in Tuscaloosa for the first time maybe in almost a decade. And it's a kid by the name of Jalen Milroe, who, by the way, is about 60-1 right now to win the Heisman. Did start one game last year for the injured Bryce Young. But those are big shoes to fill, right, Travis? Where does Jalen Milroe slot into the Alabama quarterback battle heading into camp?
Well, he's certainly one of those three guys at this point. It's almost impossible to maybe pick a favorite between Milroe and Tyler Simpson and Tyler Buckner coming in from Notre Dame. So it's a three-horse race, and it's going to be fascinating to watch Nick Saban and new offensive coordinator Tommy Rees try to get that thing narrowed down to at least two guys as quickly as they can. They'll have a couple of fall camp scrimmages, and then before you know it, it'll be time for Middle Tennessee with Texas on deck. So certainly some urgency there. I think when you look at all three candidates, there's some things that you can point to as favoring that potential candidate. I think for Milroe, in an offense that's run heavy, that you anticipate being more run heavy, or at least the first priority being the run game more so than it's been the last couple of years. He can facilitate that, and he can also contribute to that with his skill set. And then you look at Ty Simpson, he's kind of a in-between guy. He can run it, but he's probably the more polished of the two or three passers. I'd say Buckner's up there, too, in the little bit I've seen of him. And, Buckner showed you in Notre Dame's Gator Bowl win over South Carolina. He can do it with his legs, too. So I think there's going to be a mix that's required. And ultimately, I think ball security, taking care of the football, turnovers, and keeping those to a minimum is going to go a long way in determining the winner.
Travis, how do you like this rotation of the wide receiver position? Tremaine Burton, obviously the Georgia transfer from last year, and then Ja'Cory Brooks, and then potentially Kobe Prentice, Isaiah Bond, and Emmanuel Henderson. Who are some of the guys that you think could emerge for this team? Because we're so used to Bama having just absolute dudes at the receiver position.
Yeah, just in terms of depth of talent, you like it a lot. Last season, Burton and Brooks did some good things. They kind of combined to give you a wide receiver, a number one wide receiver. They didn't individually give you the kind of production that maybe you had seen in previous seasons from Devontae Smith, Jamison Williams, some of those guys. But coming back is a little different feel to it this time around, because a year ago, even with the departures of Mechie and Williams from the previous season, you kind of figured that Bryce would lift the play of the wide receivers and really the skill talent around him in general. And so this time around, you're looking at guys like Burton and Brooks and Malik Benson coming in from the junior college ranks, a couple of freshmen that you played a year ago, and Isaiah Bond, Kobe Prentice. You're thinking, these guys might be able to lift the quarterback play. You haven't really needed that over the last 4 or 5 years, but more so than certainly the last couple of years. I think it's going to be on these veteran wide receivers to help the quarterback out.
Joined by Travis Reier, senior analyst over at BamaOnline.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Travis Reier. And it's when I handicap college football teams, a red flag for me is when the team is replacing both the offensive and defensive coordinator. Their early success sometimes can be a little bit choppy. That's what we see on the defensive side as well. We talk about the offensive side of the ball, new coordinator this year, new quarterback this year. On the defensive side of the ball, Kevin Steele, who had a ton of success at Auburn, has a big task in front of him, replacing some really talented players, especially up front. When we think about Alabama, recently it's been more offense, but at their core, at their guts, a great defensive team. What should we expect from the Crimson Tide on the defensive side of the ball this year with a new coordinator?
Yeah, the good thing with Kevin is there's certainly a familiarity there between himself and Nick, having worked together in a couple of previous stints at Alabama. So I think it's a stabilizing hire. I know that sounds kind of crazy when you consider that you're replacing a guy that spent the last 4 or 5 years at the helm of that Alabama defense and Pete Golding. But again, as we know, Kevin Steele, a guy that's been around the block. He's been around the block with Nick. So I think that's a good thing. But they do have to replace a ton of production, really at every level of the defense. So they've got talent, as you might expect. They continue to recruit at a very high level, but up front, a second-year player like Jaheim Otis right there in the middle of that defensive line is going to be counted on heavily. I think getting Justin Aboigbe back healthy for a fifth year at the end position is going to be very important. And they've got some edge guys that you know a lot about. Dallas Turner, Chris Braswell, Will Anderson moving on, but still feel good about some of those guys at the edge spots, inside linebacker and safety, right up the middle of that defense. They're counting on Caleb Downs, a true freshman at safety, a fantastic young player who I think you're going to hear some comparisons to Minka Fitzpatrick probably before it's all said and done. Inside linebacker, you lose a lot of experience there. So Deontay Lawson's a guy that played a lot last season. I think they're going to ask him to take on more of the load. And, who is that play caller at inside linebacker? They brought in Trez Marshall, a transfer from Georgia. Justin Jefferson, a promising junior college prospect, is now in that mix. So corner you like with what you got there because Kool-Aid McKinstry, an All-American. Terrion Arnold played a good bit last season, and they really like a young nickelback that they've got in Earl Little Jr., whose father, it may sound familiar, was a really good defensive back for Miami back in the day. So, there are pieces, as you, again, would have expected Alabama, but as far as documented game production, absolutely a lot to replace.
Travis, you took my next question. I was going to ask you about Dallas Turner and Caleb Downs. But let's go to the other side of the ball then. Jace McClellan, potentially the starting running back there. You look at the room, Justice Haynes, a big-time freshman coming in there, Roydell Williams as well. Tell me a little bit about how you see the starter or who would be, and then how the depth lines up at the tailback position, which has always been a key cog in the Bama offense.
It has been key, and I think it's going to be even more key because I don't think they're going to be as quarterback-centric as they've been with Bryce Young, certainly the last couple of years, or even Mack before that, Tua. So they're going to lean on that depth at running back. And Jace is a guy that has a lot of experience. He's had a couple of injuries. So can he stay healthy over the course of 13, 14, 15 games? That's important, but that depth certainly gives them some security there with Justice Haynes coming in as an outstanding young freshman back. And you said Roydell Williams. Don't forget about this guy. He can bring some thump, and he's, I think, a good fit for what Tommy Rees wants to do, more direct runs. I think with Tommy Rees in this offense and letting this offensive line really get after people on early downs especially. So Roydell is kind of a one-cut runner. I think that fits him well. And, Jam Miller's a guy that's going into his second year. Really, really good back, promising back as well. Running style similar to Roydell's, probably more of a burst and an ability to bounce and get to the corner. So he's going to be in that mix. And, they brought in another five-star over the summer in Richard Young, who, along with Justice Haynes, gave him a heck of a 1-2 punch in this most recent recruiting class.
Travis, what's the offensive line shaping out to be like this year? Bama, even with Bryce Young, who was probably maybe one of the smartest players in the history of college football last year, they were still outside the top 30 in sacks per game. Offensive line, a little leaky. Bryce, of course, got hurt at one point. Do we think it's going to be a little more secure up front for whoever's under center for the Tide this year?
Yeah, I think they're counting on that area being the identity for their offense, if not their football team in general. Kind of retro Bama a little bit. Obviously, the quarterback's still going to have to make some plays. It's an era of football right now where you can't just hide a quarterback or the passing game. But first and foremost, absolutely. With a guy like J.C. Latham back at tackle, Seth McLaughlin at center, Tyler Booker in there at guard, Darian Dalcourt, a veteran player that's back. Looks like he's going to be more of an option at guard after starting each of the last two seasons with the ones at center. So they've got a nice mix of talent and some guys that have played a lot. So I think for sure that offensive line, they're counting on it being an absolute strength for, again, not just the offense, but for the team in general.
Travis, outside of the LSU and the Texas games, which are both in Tuscaloosa, what other game concerns you as a Bama fan or backer this year?
You know, I think the good news for Alabama is in September, Texas is in Tuscaloosa. In October, Tennessee is in Tuscaloosa. In November, LSU is in Tuscaloosa. So I believe people look at Alabama's schedule and think, wow, this sets up perfectly for them. And when you talk about those three specific games, absolutely. I think they really needed to have Texas in Tuscaloosa this time around because of the transition they're going to be going through. But you know, I think there's some games on the road, a game like Texas A&M in early October. You know, if A&M actually lives up to it this time around, that will be a tough matchup for Alabama. So I would say those 3 or 4 games are what you're going to look at first and foremost.
Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com. Follow him on Twitter at Travis Reier. We appreciate the time, pal.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.